On July 14th, US President Donald Trump played host at the White House to Iraq's new Prime Minister.
They have done a fantastic job over the last very short period of time, but they have a great leader, the new Prime Minister. He's a great leader. I think he's going to be there for a long period of time, and it's great to have you at the White House. Thank you very much. And he's a young man. He's young and he's handsome, which I don't like. I'm not happy about it.
In his own unique way, he lavished praise on the leader, insisting that the two men had great chemistry. Less than 10 days later, the Iraqi Prime Minister was shaking hands with a different leader, an arch-enemy of the United States, President of Iran, Masoud Pezeshkian. As had happened at the White House in Washington, D.C., in Tehran, it was more smiles and warm handshakes of brotherly love and cooperation, with added marching bands. These were the first two foreign trips of the recently appointed Iraqi Prime Minister, Ali al-Zaidi. As leader of Iraq, it's now his unenviable job to weave a path for the country between the US, who offer much-needed investment, and Iran, who wield power and influence within the country through their backing of armed groups. This week, who is Ali al-Zaidi, and where does he come from? How does he plan to confront the corrupt elements of the leadership and neuter the threat from armed groups? And can he guide the country between the US and Iran as their war with each other continues? My name is Hugo Goodridge, and you're listening to The New Arab Voice. On May 14th, Ali al-Zaidi was officially sworn in as Iraq's new Prime Minister. You may not have previously heard of Ali al-Zaidi, and you wouldn't be alone. He emerged as somewhat of a surprise candidate for the position.
So Ali al-Zaidi was quite unknown to the general Iraqi public before he was nominated for this position.
This is Lahi Pijal, Deputy Programme Director for the Middle East and North Africa at the International Crisis Group.
Ali al-Zaidi doesn't have a political track record whatsoever. He's never run in an election at any level in Iraq. He comes from a business background, so he has had to deal with the political establishment quite a bit, as you have to as a business leader in Iraq. But that is the limit of his experience with politics in Iraq. So it was a strange choice, and to some degree it came out of desperation.
Ali al-Zaidi is a businessman. He was born in the 1980s to a prominent Shia family in southern Iraq. He holds a number of degrees and during his business career has headed a number of successful companies. These include, but are not limited to, the multi-sector conglomerate Al-Wataniya Holding Group, Dijla TV, Tawoon Hypermarket, and the Al-Always Group, a different conglomerate that has interests in a number of sectors and holds a number of contracts with Iraq's Ministry of Trade. He is perhaps best known as the former chairman of Al-Janoub Islamic Bank. He chaired the board of directors until 2019, before the bank was sanctioned by the US in 2024 over alleged money laundering on behalf of Iran and Iran-backed militia groups. Additionally, the bank was also banned by the Central Bank of Iraq. Although arguably an oligarch of the post-US invasion era, al-Zaidi himself has never been implicated or tied to money laundering or financial activities related to Iran or Iranian-backed groups. Prior to his recent ascension, he had no political experience beyond securing and managing government contracts. What he did have was powerful friends, and one powerful friend in particular.
But there was also one figure that promoted him, and that is Zidan, which we can describe as kind of the Chief Justice in Iraq. He's the head of the Supreme Judicial Council.
Zidan was one of the first senior judges to be appointed following the fall of Saddam Hussein, and over the years rose the ranks of the country's judiciary, eventually becoming the president of the Supreme Judicial Council in Iraq. With his growing reputation, power and influence in the country's judiciary, he also became somewhat of a political power broker.
He was the one who promoted al-Zaidi, not just in Iraq, but also with the US, and did so quite successfully. So I think he read the US political scene quite well, in the sense that the current administration is quite business-oriented, and the current envoy, Tom Barrack, was probably looking for this type of personality. And maybe there is a hope in the US administration that Zaidi can become something like Ahmed al-Shara for them in Syria, right? Someone that is open to business, that can navigate the political landscape, but that isn't wedded to it in the same way that some of the others have been.
It probably shouldn't come as a surprise that the Trump-led White House liked the idea of a billionaire businessman being president of Iraq. But it's not just the US who approved. He was also generally accepted by Iraq's lawmakers.
He doesn't come with the baggage that other politicians do, but it also means that he's less experienced. And the Shia coordination framework, several of the members there have been saying for years now that what they expect from a prime minister is someone that operates more like a general manager rather than a prime minister. What this means is that they don't want a prime minister that becomes a powerhouse of his own. And that is why I think that Maliki's nomination in particular faced quite a lot of pushback, because the memory that people have of Maliki is that he became more authoritarian in his second term. So in Zaidi's case, I think that the framework leaders probably thought that this is a person that we can steer from behind and that can cater to our interests.
Ali al-Zaidi was able to come to power with the backing of a powerful political ally in the form of Zaidan and the approval of the US. With these in place, the coordination framework, a powerful council of Iraqi Shiite political parties who choose the prime minister, were able to get behind al-Zaidi. But, as mentioned, he was an outsider. So where were the frontrunners? Why not pick one of them?
There were two other candidates that are well known. So the most recent prime minister, Mohammed Shia al-Sudani, and a former prime minister, Nouri al-Maliki. And the two of them were trying to outmaneuver each other in order to come back to the position or retain the position in the case of Sudani. This didn't go very well for several reasons. One was that the war started and it put Sudani's caretaker government in a very difficult position. And secondly, Maliki was rejected by parts of the political establishment in Iraq, but also by the US. And it started with a post by the US President Donald Trump that essentially embarrassed al-Maliki.
At the start of the race to be Prime Minister, Nouri al-Maliki and Mohammed al-Sudani were the presumed candidates, but both were flawed. The incumbent, Mohammed al-Sudani, had been weakened by the US-Israeli-Iran war and his inability to keep Iraq isolated from the conflict. And Nouri al-Maliki, who had previously held the office between 2006 and 2014, was deemed unacceptable by the US. US President Donald Trump very publicly rejected al-Maliki when he published on Truth Social saying, "I'm hearing that the great country of Iraq might make a very bad choice by reinstating Nouri al-Maliki as Prime Minister. Last time Maliki was in power, the country descended into poverty and total chaos. This should not be allowed to happen again. Because of his insane policies and ideologies, if elected, the United States of America will no longer help Iraq. And if we are not there to help, Iraq has zero chance of success, prosperity, or freedom. Make Iraq great again. It is perhaps unsurprising that some in Iraq, such as Hussein Munez, head of a parliamentary bloc close to the armed group Kataib Hezbollah, decried US interference in Iraqi politics.
This government has unfortunately witnessed the establishment of dangerous practices that threaten the future of the political process, foremost among them the clear and direct American interference in shaping the political scene.
It's out with the old and in with the new. So what is Ali al-Zaidi going to do? What's his grand plan? In a speech on May 15th, he laid out his vision to lawmakers.
The first path is economic development and reform, where we move towards a strong, diversified economy, effectively integrated with its regional environment, and a state based on genuine, productive investment that preserves and develops the country's wealth and establishes a solid infrastructure.
Very few prime ministers in Iraq have set a political agenda similar to what, a new government in a European country would do, right? I mean, if you look at his initial statement and his government program, it's very general strokes, right? Ensure state monopoly on violence, fight corruption, work on development infrastructure projects. But it doesn't really break those down. And a lot of political efforts are about how you do that, right? I mean, generally, in any context, everyone would probably sign up to those three things.
It would be difficult to argue against these things.
But the question is, how do you get there? And in that sense, I don't think that there is yet, at least, much substance in terms of what he wants to do or how he will go about it. But I think, his business orientation also means that he has faced the black hole of red tape that you would have to go through in Iraq in order to do business. And so I think if there is any area where he could actually have a positive impact, it would probably be that one. If he's able to seek out the right sort of help to improve such processes, which have everything to do with, financial regulations, to the banking sector, to technological developments that are needed. Iraq is a cash-based economy, there are a lot of things that can be done. But again, at every juncture, you're probably also going to face resistance from most political parties because really no one is interested in more transparency.
For the most part, we could probably expect al-Zaidi to effectively continue with the work of previous prime ministers.
I think no one in the government has expressed what Iraq's vision is for the next 4 years. I can imagine that he will stay the course on some of the big infrastructure projects that Sudani embarked on, like the development road, for instance, this big project that is supposed to connect the ports in Basra on the Gulf to Turkey through railway and highways and oil pipelines in the future. But, this is a project that is going to take decades to complete.
But of course, there are also more immediate concerns, albeit long-standing immediate concerns.
So right now, I think the way that he's seeking to balance Iraq between the US and Iran rivalry, which has been a challenge for every prime minister since 2003, right? I think that what he's doing is more driven by external pressure than his own vision. So, his visit to the US came only 2 months after his appointment, which is quite soon. It's an important state visit. It wasn't surprising that it was his first state visit, but he really doesn't have much to show for in these 2 months, right? Would it have made more sense to go to the US at a later point where things are more clear, even for himself, in terms of what it is that he wants to achieve.
There are immediate concerns for Ali al-Zaidi, namely the war in Iran. There are also ongoing projects, mainly related to infrastructure projects that he has inherited and will likely outlast his time in office. But given the nature of his ascension and what is wanted from him as Prime Minister by his fellow lawmakers, there are limits on the scope of his ambitions, although he has launched some of his own campaigns. On June 28th, the Prime Minister addressed a session of the Council of Ministers.
هذه الصولة هي كصولة أولى ما منتهي موضوع الفساد مستمرين.
This campaign is only the beginning. The issue of corruption is not over. We will continue to fight it. Anyone who has public funds must return the funds to their owners. The people's money must return to the people. I am mandated by a citizen who wants a glimmer of hope in his country. I am today responsible for the people, for their lives, and for their interests. I can't stay silent about any mistake. I will not be lenient on the interests of the Iraqi people. And this government will be a distinguished government, God willing.
وهذه الحكومة راح تكون حكومة مميزة بإذن الله.
The campaign was Operation Dawn. On the morning of June 28th, doors were broken in and arrests were made. In the days that followed, more arrests were made. A massive operation of arrests and seizures targeting corrupt politicians and officials.
He hasn't targeted Soudani, his predecessor himself, but he has targeted several MPs that ran on Soudani's list. So I think in the initial roundup, that the night where Zaidi ordered the counterterrorism service to spread out in Baghdad, and especially in the Green Zone, to arrest several people, a significant part of those arrested among the MPs were Soudani's MPs. And then, you have a few others that are known political names in Iraq. A woman MP, al-Zaidi, for instance, who was also among the arrested. And she has been someone that has changed parties several times. She used to be Maliki's person. I think this time she had run on Soudani's list. But she's also someone that is known to the public to be corrupt. The other one significant person that was arrested was a leader of a political party, but a Sunni political party, مثلا Samarai. It's not the largest Sunni party. And so again, you don't go after, really the biggest sharks, but he is seen as someone that can be sacrificed without a significant political backlash.
Anti-corruption drives aren't new in Iraq. Al-Zaidi's predecessors, Prime Ministers Kadhimi and Soudani, both pledged to crack down on corruption, and both ended their time in office with corruption rife throughout the country. In their 2025 index, Transparency International gave Iraq a score of just 28 out of a possible 100, ranking it 136 out of 182 countries in their corruption index. But past failures to tackle the issue do not lessen what al-Zaidi is attempting to do today.
I think it worked really well for Zaidi with some of these personalities that he targeted, because he knew that it would have an impact on the street in the sense that people would be appreciative of seeing some of these corrupt figures being arrested. I know that there has been a lot of questions in terms of, is this a political purge, right? Is he going after his opponents? Or is it a genuine anti-corruption effort? And I think it is a little bit of both. He benefits from weakening his opponents. He also knows that he cannot go after, the top tier of Iraq's political elite, because that would probably prompt not just a backlash, but perhaps even a violent one, right? At the end of the day, all of the parties that have established themselves in this kind of post-2003 political order, to some degree have done it through violent means. And so, the political gains, certainly when it comes to, for instance, the Iran-backed groups, are seen as spoils of war, right? This is their right. They have fought, they have established themselves, not just as armed groups, but also as political parties, and they have performed well in elections. And so the logic would be that you can't go after them, or you can't go after someone like Nouri al-Maliki, who was a two-term prime minister and built his own little deep state during those 8 years, and to this day wields significant power in Iraq, despite the fact that he hasn't been prime minister now for, over 12 years.
He has targeted impactful figures, those whose arrests would cut through with the public. But curiously, top-level figures tarnished by corruption allegations have not been touched.
But then to the question of whether this is genuine, so I have argued recently that it's not really arrests of corrupt politicians that is going to do the trick, because corruption is the system in many ways. And, if you would go after every corrupt politician, there would be no one left. That's the sad reality. So, in order for this to be genuine, you would have to couple it with some really intrusive reforms into Iraq's governance and judicial system that I think no one is really ready to make. And Zaidi, having no political constituency of his own, I mean, he can build it over time. He's also, his main backer is Fagh Zaidan. And yes, Fagh Zaidan is the head of the judiciary, but he's also part of the political system that the judiciary upholds, right? So there are serious limitations to what you can do or what you can achieve with this anti-corruption campaign. But at least, I think, in the eyes of the Iraqis, it sends a signal that, okay, some of these big profiles that are known to be corrupt are not untouchable. He might not have targeted the top tier, but at least it's a signal for the future.
Corruption in Iraq is endemic and regrettably has now been baked into daily life and business. To root out all corruption could be tantamount to a complete dismantling of the political, ruling and financial structure in the country. The consequences of such action have the potential to be devastating and violent for the country. The new Prime Minister's anti-corruption drive might not be tackling the top tiers of corruption, but he is doing something.
The Iraqis are also very jaded with the political system, to the degree that any small effort will be appreciated, I think. I think that there are real structural challenges that can only come with political will. And it's not sufficient that Zaidi and his closest crew are the ones who have that political will, right? You would need to get the entire political establishment on board for that. And I think that's just a very far-fetched prospect.
Corruption isn't the only crusade of Ali al-Zaidi. When he was sworn in as Iraq's new Prime Minister, he announced another campaign for his administration.
The third path involves reforming the security apparatus by restricting weapons to state control, developing and strengthening the capabilities of the security forces.
Since the overthrow of Saddam Hussein and the US occupation, Iraq has been ruled by an elected government from Baghdad. But that does not mean that the government's control and influence extends across the country. Beyond the heavily securitized green zone in the capital, a myriad of armed groups wield power and influence, using a mixture of strong-arm authority, patronage, and violence. These groups operate outside government's control and do not take direct orders from the government. They are a complicated network, and not all are alike. Some are loyal to a politician or a political party. Others are more sectarian in nature, perhaps loyal to a religious figure, while others are loyal to a political and religious ideology. In broad brushstrokes, we could put the armed groups into two categories. There are the groups that are loyal to and receive funding and support from the Iranian regime, and there are the groups that don't. This is a very simplistic way of viewing the groups, but probably the easiest way to understand the situation. As previously mentioned, when al-Zaidi took office, he sought to disarm these groups, or integrate them into the state security apparatus. And some of these groups have agreed. On June 4th, Saraya al-Salam, the armed group of the powerful Shia cleric Muqtada al-Sadr, held a ceremony in Samarra, north of Baghdad, where they lowered their flag to signify their integration into the state security forces. Speaking at the ceremony, Qais al-Mohammadawi, Deputy Commander of Joint Operations, said,
"The committee, after deliberations and discussions, has set up a mechanism and framework related to the handover of weapons according to their classification into light, medium and heavy arms, followed by the reintegration of these formations based on priorities and operational sectors. It is worth noting that these formations were originally administratively affiliated with the Popular Mobilization Forces and had a political affiliation."
Saraya al-Salam have decided to integrate, along with some other groups. But why? What's in it for them?
You know, as many have been saying, the devil is in the details. What's in it for these armed groups to showcase this change in their policy to give up, their arms, supposedly, and to integrate their fighters into the government?
This is Ranad Mansour, Deputy Director of the Middle East and North Africa Programme at Chatham House and the Director of the Iraq Initiative at Chatham House.
First of all, those who are willing to do it are those who are already significantly embedded in the Iraqi government and the Iraqi state. People like Muqtada al-Sadr, Qais al-Khazali. These are leaders who have parliamentarians, they have, senior civil servants, they have local councillors. I mean, across the Iraqi state, they are deeply embedded. And so what this is for them is an opportunity to put some of their fighters into, the security sector, the National Security Council or other bodies of security agencies in Iraq. It gives them access, of course, to more, state salaries, equipment, it gives them that kind of formal access.
For a number of armed groups, it's less about integrating and more about completing the final stage of a process that has been going on for a while.
Where I think the line will be drawn will be around the question of command and control. Will those fighters integrated into the Iraqi government security sector become loyal to the government, or will they first remain loyal to the parties, to their parties that are putting them there? Just because you have fighters inside the government does not mean that the chain of command is necessarily hierarchical in the kind of formal way inside the government, and that these leaders will still expect to be the ultimate decision makers over their fighters wherever they sit.
For the fighters in these armed groups, they might be giving up on the ideologies of the groups they are attached to and signing on to the ideologies of the state structures. But in return, they are getting steady salaries and maintaining their positions. For the leaders of these groups, they could be giving up a vast amount of leverage. And for some, this is a price they're not willing to pay, and are currently refusing to lay down their arms or integrate. These would be the previously mentioned groups who are loyal to or supported by Iran.
Well, if you follow the logic that those that are more comfortable and are already deeply embedded in the state are less mindful of sending their fighters into the state because they have so much control on that side, then there's the other sort of scenario, the other groups that have less influence on the formal side. So groups such as Kataib Hezbollah or Harakat al-Nujaba, groups that obviously have less embeddedness in the Iraqi government, therefore have less trust in the Iraqi government and the Iraqi state, and also groups that are now actively fighting a fight which they call a resistance. The war between the US and Israel and Iran is continuing, and Iraq is one of the important battlegrounds. And so their agenda isn't to integrate into the Iraqi state. Their agenda is to fight the resistance war, working alongside Iran, its Revolutionary Guards, Corps, and other actors of the axis of resistance. So for these reasons, they will fight to defend their ability to take part in this war, which they see as resistance.
In normal times, it would be, and has proven to be, very difficult to persuade Iran-backed groups in Iraq to disarm. Currently, we are not in normal times. The war between the US and Iran continues to sway between different states of conflict, quiet, and diplomacy. And the Iran-backed groups in Iraq are part of that. They have taken part in the fighting, launching drones at neighbouring countries, often on behalf of Iran. As if to emphasise this point, news is emerging at the time of recording of a joint US-Saudi strike on Iraqi militias supported by Iran, in retaliation for the latter's involvement in attacks on Saudi oil infrastructure. The groups who have agreed to integrate have handed the new government an easy win. There are issues remaining, but still good news. For those that won't integrate, the question is, what now? What's the next step for the government? And how far are they willing to go?
An early indication of this willingness was as part of the anti-corruption drive going after an MP linked to Kitab Hezbollah. Now, conveniently, that MP wasn't home to be arrested under the indictment and had been tipped off. And I think what that shows fundamentally is, to some extent, an apprehension for now to have a showdown with Kitab Hezbollah, or some of these groups that are resisting the drive to integrate. And keep in mind, previous administrations, like former Prime Minister Mustafa al-Kadhimi, when he went after and tried to put in jail Kitab Hezbollah fighters, there was tremendous backlash. And ultimately they were let go.
Given the opportunity to confront a corrupt individual, the government effectively backed down.
Fundamentally, the question is, will this new government in Iraq be willing to fight against these groups to impose its deadline and to impose its program of integrating armed groups? I think for now it seems unlikely that there is that willingness, but we'll have to wait and see. And also capability, because these groups have been operating in Iraq since regime change. They have significant support from Iran at the moment. So this is a very difficult task, and these groups will not go down lightly.
The armed groups in Iraq were a known problem. The war in Iran has highlighted, underlined, and put in bold this problem. The war has exposed the lack of sovereignty that the government in Baghdad has. The policy of the government was to stay out of the war and improve relations with Gulf nations. But these armed groups have brought the country into the war and attacked Gulf nations.
I think, the part of why the government is trying to address this militia problem now is not just because there's significant push from the Trump administration, and there certainly is, but also because domestically there is huge concern with having a government that doesn't have sovereignty, having a government where, if one of these groups attacks and kills significant Americans, there will be huge consequences for Iraq, for example. And we've even seen recently the US using another form of leverage. Iraq's main export is oil and gas, it's energy, and it is sold in US dollars into an account that is in the United States in US dollars. And the US has begun to threaten to freeze this money. It's threatened to not pay Iraq its money. And this would devastate Iraq. So it's in the middle of this war. It's under significant pressure from the US. And there are groups that are out of its control that are spoilers. And that is, I think, the predicament in which the Iraqi government finds itself.
As these groups threaten to drag the country further into the war, they are also threatening future investment in the country. As previously mentioned, President Ali al-Zaidi was in Washington to meet with President Trump. During this visit, a number of memorandums of understanding were signed regarding US investment, particularly relating to US oil companies. These MOUs are effectively worthless on their own, but they do represent a desire and an intent to have US investment and to have US companies operating in Iraq.
Bringing these US companies is also bringing potential targets from these resistance groups or for these resistance groups. And can the Iraqi government defend from these attacks? We've seen, for example, in the Kurdistan region, companies such as Dana Gas, which is a UAE company, but other companies as well, being attacked by these groups over years. And I think it's not far to imagine that if in this context where the war will continue, that any American business in operations in Iraq will certainly be targets for these resistance groups. So that is the challenge that the new government is facing, promising all of these MOUs and all of these opportunities for American companies, but then promising that they will also manage to keep them secure. The question is whether that will be possible.
While the war continues, the prospect for groups backed by Iran disarming or integrating into the state security apparatus looks slim to non-existent. And it certainly would appear that the government has little to no inclination to confront these groups and force the situation. There are also concerns surrounding those who have agreed to integrate. Today, they are agreeing to integrate and be part of the state security structures. But what about tomorrow? If the circumstances in the country change, will their loyalties remain or revert?
The details are being discussed. In the past, the idea had been you already have within the Iraqi National Security Advisory, you have a commission, which is the Commission for the PMF.
The PMF is the Popular Mobilization Forces. It's composed of about 60-odd, primarily Shia armed factions, and was instrumental in the fight against the Islamic State terror group.
These groups all fall under the umbrella of the PMF. And the idea has always been, we can put these groups, as they've already done with some of them, into the PMF commission. And then change the leadership of the PMF commission so it's not just PMF leaders, but maybe military leaders instead. So to try to, at the top of that, depoliticize that. But of course, that is a challenge because that doesn't address this loyalty issue and who these fighters ultimately are accountable to.
Keeping the structure and the bodies the same but changing the leadership is one option. Other options have been discussed, including moving groups to ministries, such as the Ministry of the Interior or the Defence Ministry, who could be the controlling force over them. In some cases, this has already happened.
There are many different plans being put forward. What I would say, though, is because of the nature of the Iraqi state, because even beyond the security sector, the reality is that a government civil servant, just like an integrated officer, is, in the way the Iraqi state built, more likely to answer to a political boss than to a government boss. It makes it highly unlikely that this integration will lead to a more coherent security sector.
Will they remain loyal to the state structures or revert back to their previous loyalties? Ultimately, there's no way of knowing. Until the situation arrives, they won't know if they have done enough to maintain loyalties. While the buy-in from Iran-backed groups is still lacking, the buy-in from the Iraqi public does appear to be there.
I mean, the fact that most of the Iraqi establishment, including, popular leaders like Muqtada Sadr or Qais al-Khazali, are pro this move, I think is partly because of the general mood in society. I mean, these resistance groups that are resisting this integration effort do not have as much of a social base in Iraq. So most Iraqis do not want to live under a militia state, do not want to live under the kind of unpredictability of having multiple armed groups, governing different neighborhoods or different parts of the country, and do believe in sort of in nationalist and patriotic terms that the Iraqi army should be, and the Iraqi police and the state should be the one overseeing this. So that's important, I think, for a lot of Iraqis, and especially in recent years. Many Iraqis who rose up against corruption, for example, during the Tishreen protests, began blaming some of these armed groups for being part of the repression of their protests. And of course, their connection to Iran. Many Iraqis have in recent years become very against Iran's meddling in Iraq. I mean, the chants "Iran barra barra," Iran out, have became quite popular. And I'm speaking here before this war. I mean, we'll see how that might change. But nonetheless, I would say most Iraqis would, want to have a more stable security sector that is more closely embedded with the formal government.
Iraq's new prime minister is a political outsider, but that doesn't change the problems that he has to deal with, nor does it change the realities on the ground. An anti-corruption drive is important and valiant, but it's not a panacea for the country's problems, and it's unlikely that he will be able to arrest the individuals at the top of the pyramid. His ambition to disarm and integrate the armed groups is also important and valiant, but the country cannot and will not risk confrontation. Iraq cannot afford to isolate itself from Iran, and Iraq needs US investment to secure its economic future. It's the crux of Iraq's problems. Trapped between warring parties, victims to their whims, and faced with a choice that it can never make.
This has been a reality for the Iraqi government for a long time. It was certainly much better when the two were on the same side. For example, during the fight against Islamic State, ISIS, the Iranians and the Americans were on the same side. And the Iraqi government was, balancing that relationship well. But definitely after ISIS, and also with the Trump administration's ending, end of the JCPOA, the nuclear deal, and the kind of antagonisms between the US and Iran, the Iraqi government has been stuck. And as we've been saying, at times it's tried to play messenger, convener, even potentially mediator. I mean, Iraq has had some convening successes with, for example, in the past between the Saudis and the Iranians. But this, I think, is a task too tall, too difficult for the Iraqi government. Rather than being able to balance or manage this war and these two actors that are fighting each other, it is likely that Iraq will be one of the battlegrounds for their war and will continue to be one of the battlegrounds for their war. Certain Iraqi leaders see this and are trying to push something different, but I think it's a tough task, and the reality is that Iraq will most likely continue to have to not have as much agency, I'd say, over its own affairs as some leaders would want.
And final words to Lahib Hijal.
Iraq can't pick. You can't escape your geography. And Iran shares the longest border that Iraq has with any of its neighboring countries. And the US, for obvious reasons, because of the Iraq War and the US occupation, has significant interests in Iraq. And Iraq, too, has an interest in maintaining good relations with the US. So it's the only country in the region that is an ally of both. And I mean, it explains so much about why Iraq is in such a difficult position and has been consistently over the last 2 decades, because it can't get rid of either of them. And whenever there have been efforts in the past, we can take the very short stint of former Prime Minister Adel Abdel Mahdi. He had an idea that he was going to pivot to China, right? So, you can escape, all of those things that we imagine that the US can offer that Iran can't, right? You can go and get them from the Chinese instead. It didn't work out. I mean, not just because China is far away, the US is too, but China is also not interested in replacing the US in that way. And I think we see similar issues in other parts of the region right now, right? In the Gulf, it has been wedded way more closely to the US than Iraq has. And they still have a problem, breaking out of that dependency and finding other partners that can make up for everything that the US offers in terms of security and otherwise.
This episode of The New Arab Voice was written and produced by me, Hugo Guttridge. Our theme music was by Omar Al-Film. The New Arab Voice will be back with a new episode shortly. Don't forget to subscribe to get notified for when a new episode drops. You can find the link in the show notes. Until then, you can find all our previous episodes on all major podcast platforms. You can also check out our social media accounts on Instagram and X, both at TNA Podcasts, for additional content. And you can email us, podcast@newarab.com. That's podcast@newarab.com. You can subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. And you can also rate and review, which helps us spread the word. Don't forget to follow The New Arab on Facebook, X and Instagram for all the latest news, analysis and opinion from the region.